These words were written during the dark days of democracy in the year 1964, 5 years after the revolt that got men killed in a small region of KwaHaraba, the birthplace of my grandfather and the ancestors before him. These words were written in the middle of the infamous cabinet crisis, the exile of men, but somehow the pages of this manuscript survived and sneaked into a century that needs this country recolonized, a century that no longer sees long-lived Kamuzu glowing in the skies. To my surprise, every time I lay my eyes on the black, red, green colors bonded together like family ties, I see the demise and the rise of our sons. But somehow, we will survive. We will survive like Marcus Garvey walking through the whirlwind and the storm. We will survive like Pompeo shot in the face outside his home. We will survive like these pages that are swear written before me by a writer unknown. We will survive like Christians, reborn, born from Mother Malawi, who mothered this transformation from a Rose Chiwambo to a Joyce Banda, but somehow the pain remains the same. We don't bleed blood, it's envy and hate that runs in our veins. We wear a vow smile that is upside down. We come from a war-torn land, a battlefield, not of which we hear gun sounds shout. We come from the unknown, where power to the people is foul. We are nurtured by secrets. We are kept in the dark because blackouts are allowed. So we no longer protest because the experience was sour. We are like sons of a lesser God because of our hair, pain, poverty, and self-love is power. But somehow we will survive. We will survive like Bob Marley, the black survivors, writing that song Survival as the soundtrack of our lives. We will survive because these words survived during the long years of oppression, depression, rejection of tribes, culture, and religion. The long years of genderized ideas and politics as usual. The long years of conscious imprisonment of chameleons and gods. The long years of hunger and furious anger. Now we are that anger, that deep within anger, the anger that pissed off the men in blue with pangas, the anger that one day will free us from these chains and survive, the anger that one day will free us from these chains and survive. We will survive because these words were written during the uprising of Chisiza and somehow sneaked into a generation that's misled by social media, a generation living in theory online, a generation fed by fear and lies, a generation told it is the future leaders of tomorrow, but tomorrow, my friend, will never arrive. But somehow, we will survive. We will survive from them. We will survive from us. We will survive from this justice unjust, the paradox of the rich and the poor swaying justice unjust. We will survive simply because we are gold in the dust. We will survive from this plunder of public bread. We will survive from this rush of blood to the head. We will survive despite us being puppets. We will survive from this country's ever bad budget. We will survive because these words survived during the dark days of non-democracy and somehow eerily sneaked into the palms of a poet reciting this poem tonight to tell you that we will survive like we always do. We will survive because we've been through this before, since time was born.